Greetings, my friends. Jason Archer here with episode 5 of Dogs of WOD Radio. I'm joined by Scott Porter and Kirk Morales. We're broadcasting live from sunny Phoenix, Arizona. And seems like we got a couple things on the docket to run down today, gentlemen. We got a little bit about the NPFL we want to talk a little bit about. Looks like we got 8 teams out the gate. We've got combines going on. We've got some high names, or some well-known names, I should say, signing with some of these teams. We have our very own James Fitzgerald out of Phoenix here, running Phoenix Rise, who's signed Danny Nichols, all kinds of stuff. Scott, you said you've been watching a little bit about what's going on. What are your thoughts on the league right off the top?
Yeah, I when I first heard about it, it was interesting to see the development of it to where it's at now. And it kind of, you'd hear about it, but nothing was, out there in social media land, and you couldn't get much information on it. Then they put out the combines, and I, kind of looked at it a little bit, but, you still didn't hear a whole lot about it. And then I actually took some time to watch a lot of the races at the recent one, which was the Vegas Combine. And it was, it's an interesting concept, and I still have kind of mixed feelings on, what I think about it as far as being potential, big sport, in terms of comparing it to like basketball, baseball, football, etc. Yeah, but it was exciting. It was different concept a little bit than CrossFit. Obviously, it's a team-based spectator sport. You can kind of see that that's what they're going for. Is they're going to they're going for the spectator. And they're changing the concept so it can be a TV sport basically. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to make something big and you get sponsors, you got to make it spectator friendly. No one's going to want to watch a 30-minute workout.
Sure.
And you're not going to broadcast that live on TV. Of course, there are bicycling and swimming, but they're not. I guess they're more smaller sport, a little smaller in terms of like the markets of basketball and stuff. But it was kind of cool because it's different than CrossFit. They call it human performance racing, and I guess they have 11 races, and they have to be, was it 10 minutes or less, or 7 minutes, something like that. They're all short races,
right?
So I like the concept. I'm not sure if it's going to be something that stays around forever. You do see some big name athletes in it that you've heard of from CrossFit, but it'll be interesting to see where it develops, and the inaugural season's coming up. So I'll certainly be following that.
Yeah, I think it's good that they're finally trying to do something like this. Before it was just all CrossFit, and if you were interested in that type of event, your only avenue really was to go to some local event and watch it, go to maybe one of the garage games, which was a little bit bigger, or just wait for the open and go through everything that was sponsored and hosted by CrossFit. So I think it's good that someone's trying to open up another avenue and make more of a sport out of it, because I think it ultimately gives athletes more opportunity to really perform at that higher level.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you. I think it's interesting to see a large group coming out with a reasonably large budget, actually, because I think these team owners had to have something along the lines of $500,000 available to the team to be a team owner. But they're coming out and they're not using the name CrossFit. Obviously, legally they cannot, but I think the fact that they're able to not use it and still create this league points to the fact that there are a lot of people in the cross-functional world who are ready for something like this, and who understands, when you hear the term fitness or fitness league, you understand underneath it all that it's a CrossFit style event.
Sure, and a lot of that comes down to the athletes that they're trying to recruit too, right? If you follow a CrossFit athlete and all of a sudden they're competing in this other league, you're going to get it right away, whether or not it's actually called CrossFit.
That's very true. That's very true. So, well, for a lot of the people out there who maybe haven't taken a look at the combines or looked at some of the structure of the events, maybe we could just run down a little bit of how it's set up. I know I've taken a couple looks. Scott, you have too. But it looks like what they're doing to make it spectator friendly, as Scott mentioned earlier, is you have this thing and they're calling it a grid. They're kind of basing on that football concept of gridiron. And basically, you're going to have 11 events. that run through this grid. And the grid can be set up any way. It can be set up randomly, and you can sub in and out your players, if you will, for different events. And basically, the events will have a time cap. If you don't finish under the time cap, you get 0 score. If you finish under but you lose to the other team, you get a 1, and if you win, you get a 2. That's the way I understand it being set up. Is that pretty much accurate?
Yeah, I think you covered everything, and I'd just like to say, I like the fact that they're having kind of a standardized, field, so to speak. Like each sport, you look at those big sports, and they have a court or field or the pitch, the rink. They all have something standardized, for each sport. So that's what they've done. They've created a grid, and who knows? Maybe down the road, that's going to be recognizable. Whereas CrossFit's always throwing out unknown setup and workouts. With this, it's going to be, I don't know if it'd be more predictable and what you could do in terms of the exercises, but the fact that they're only doing 11 races and they'll have to be shorter time domains, it's only so creative you can get.
Sure.
So based on the workouts that I was watching and the races, I guess is what you call them, I think it's going to be a challenge for them to have some creativity in the workouts to create enough separation and enough gap in the results to make it more exciting from my perspective of like being involved in the sport. Maybe from an outsider that's not really familiar with it, and maybe they'll see it as being exciting. But the level of athletes that are on these teams is so high. The gap between their fitness and strength levels is so small that some of the workouts I was seeing, it was like the best team wasn't necessarily winning. It was, a judge no-rep somebody and they got behind by a half a second. And, they missed a station, they ran to the wrong, or whatever it was. It was like little small things. Every single athlete was handling all the exercises with no problem. So, with the level of competition and the style of the sport that they're trying to create, I think it's going to need a lot of creativity to come up with workouts that are going to be challenging enough to create that separation between the two teams.
So are you saying that from what you've observed so far, that a lot of the actual final results come down to the judges, not the athletes?
Well, yes, and just like like Jason and I have talked about it with us developing Iron Fitness Games and trying to create a different an actual concept to evaluate fitness, and that would be to measure somebody's power output. And that's how I kind of look at it. Is some of the people that are winning it's not because they're more fit or because they're stronger. It's like literally because they have a shorter range of motion. So they get done with the work so much faster. It's like you put a little tiny girl who's 5'2" on thrusters versus a girl that's 5'10". The 5'2" girl is going to win every time. They're both handling the weight extremely easily. No one's breaking up the reps. Like every single race I saw was literally a race, like a sprint. No one was getting tired. No one was, breaking up the reps. And you would do like a teammate would do a little bit of work, and then they go tag somebody else in for the next movement, or they go down the grid. There's like 4 quadrants, I believe.
Yeah.
And you can tag people in and out, and for different exercises. But it was literally like, it didn't look to me that anybody was really missing weight or having to go broken on some of the exercises. It was like, well, that team was winning because that person's handstand push-ups were super short and they just blew right through them.
Yeah, but that sort of makes it like the other spectator sports that are really popular now, right? Like if you have a basketball team and and you have a huge center, right? You're going to put your best guy in there against him, or you're going to put your best point guard against his point guard.
Yeah. And
then if you compare it to other sports, out on the East Coast, like lacrosse, for example, or hockey, where you have a midline that you sub in and out on the fly. Generally those midlines are subbed in and out on the fly based on who's on the field or what's necessary to be done on the field. From that aspect, it seems to me almost like it is, like these other more popular sports or bigger sports, if you will.
The teams are just going to need to consider more strategy when they're deciding what athletes to actually have on their team, which athletes to use for which events.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, and Scott does make a valid point, but like he's saying on here, it's not about fitness so much as it is who gets finished first.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do have the 5'2" girl and she can fly through those pull-ups, and you want to use her at every turn,
Well, I think that's a good point to talk about too. Is that we talked about it off the podcast about response from Russ Green to somebody posting on social media about the exciting development of NPFL, and Russ Green looks like he was quoted saying, that it's not a professional spectator league for CrossFit, right? That was directed towards Andre Yeager, which he's correct, and they're not claiming it to be CrossFit. They're saying it's human performance racing. So I guess that is the distinction, is that they're not claiming to test fitness, which CrossFit does claim to test fitness,
right?
Over broad time domains and different capacities, whereas the National Pro Fitness League is, even though it has fitness in the word, is more about human performance racing. And I don't know, from my perspective, it's going to be more. It's great for the athletes because, again, like Kirk said, it's more opportunity. It's growing now. It's not just one open, like one season. Now there's another opportunity for some of these athletes to, make some money and be a part of something that could grow. But I don't know, from my perspective, I kind of like the fact that about CrossFit that it does test fitness. I don't know. I just don't like somebody winning because they just had a shorter range of motion, or they were able to move faster through a movement because of their leverages. It's gonna, like I said, I think it's going to come down to, I can see both sides, but I think it's going to come down to some creativity in the workouts, because just from the workouts I've seen, the races, like I said, the athletes are so high level, it's so close. The gap is just so minimal, and they're going to have to definitely challenge them with either weights, loads. Again, the time domain has to be within a certain range there, but it's so competitive, and the athletes are so close. Like I said, it's going to take some good programming. I think that's what Dave Castro brings to CrossFit, and a lot of people don't like him, and he can come off super arrogant and douchey, and in his own right. I mean, he's helped grow the sport to a tremendous level, and but the one thing I will say is that he's a master programmer. And he's very good at coming up with workouts that are going to achieve the result that he's looking for. Whether you agree with that result or not, we saw that this year in the Open. We saw that at regionals. Everybody's complaining about the Open being well, not everyone was complaining. I was complaining. The Open was so light, but for some people that like the lighter weights, that was what they were looking for. And then we got to regionals, and then everything was gymnastics and lighter. But I mean, everyone was training. He knew everyone was training heavier stuff, so he threw a little curveball in there, programmed a lot of gymnastics, lighter weights, and that was probably the result that he wanted.
Sure.
So
yeah, and I think, kind of getting back to your original point too, I personally don't have a problem with the fact that it's a race, and I think it's interesting that it's a different perspective, in that they do have to think more about strategy, and to compare it to something else, like look at NASCAR or some other racing sport where all those cars are pretty much the same and they all perform about the same, but it comes down to the little things. How are you taking this turn, and how good is your pit crew, and it really becomes more of a team sport. Even though the actual, in this case, the athleticism or the physical capabilities of these athletes are all pretty even. So I think it's a really interesting, take, and it really brings a different perspective to these movements that people have been seeing through CrossFit only.
Yeah. You bring up NASCAR, lots of science and shit going into them cars, man. Tolerances are pretty tight, so it really comes down to what the driver's able to do behind the wheel in a lot of cases,
Right.
You can take a bad driver and put him in a crappy car, and he still ends up doing pretty well. So it speaks volumes for what the human potential, even in a situation where you're just holding a wheel and working a gas, brake, and gear, right? And I think I agree with you. I mean, I think at the highest level, you always see these minute differences in performance. If you look at Olympic level running or sprinting, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about tenths or hundredths of a second off, right? So I think that's to be expected, and I think it speaks volumes for the quality of athletes that are coming in. And you had said something that I wanted to comment on, and I fell off the train. Jeez, what was it? Oh, man.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I guess the only problem I see with this and it being a race is the judges that are involved. Because if you are talking about discrepancies of seconds, or if it gets to tenths of seconds, and there's possibly a judge to blame for a bad call, then there's going to be a lot of upset, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're going to do instant replay.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's just you already have the issue in CrossFit.
Sure.
With let's say the regionals recently with like the rope climb. There's some people that got no rep and they thought they touched the top, and the referee said no. Well, I mean, not only did you cost them a rep, but you literally cost them the workout if that was the case, because now they probably have to take 30 seconds of rest, not to mention they expended all that energy doing a no rep, and they took themselves right out of the workout because that was a 3 to 5 minute workout.
Sure.
So you could have dropped X amount of places and how many points, and then that took you out of the games. I mean, that could have been the deciding factor. I know they always say in like other sports like football, like, well, don't ever put the game in the referee's hand.
Right.
But I mean, there is going to be, on the same token, there's going to be human error when there's judging involved. But it's just kind of it's a different sport altogether, and you'd hate to get to the point where it's a big game and the judge makes a bad call and gives you a no rep.
That's the thing, right? To compare to other racing sports, there aren't a lot. I mean, look at swimming and running and anything in track and field, and there's not any sort of human component that goes into determining whether or not they got to the end properly.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but like I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and I said it's just CrossFit needs to evolve, and now NPFL, the human performance racing, it needs to evolve to a point where there's more technology, measuring these repetitions or pull-ups, or if you're doing chest-to-bar pull-ups, there needs to be something on the bar that actually can sense that your chest is contacting the bar.
Sure.
Take out the human error. Like you brought up, you just said swimming. They've got the electronic pads, track. I mean, it's not
like
somebody with
now,
a hand timer standing.
Even fencing is all electronic. Yeah. There's no human component.
Yeah, and all that stuff, to be fair, is also very difficult for the human eye to discern. If you got contacted in a fencing sport,
right,
or if you're a hair ahead of someone on a sprint, it's extremely different.
Yeah.
But I know what I was going to say now, because we're talking about the fitness aspect versus performance racing. And at the highest level, CrossFit is performance racing. They're not measuring fitness.
And we've talked about that before,
this, right? So just to be clear on this, right, CrossFit's definition of fitness is the area under your power curve, okay? So if they're measuring your power, it's your ability to perform work is the area under that power curve, okay? So if we use Scott's example of a 5'2" woman versus a 5'8" woman doing thrusters, for example, and they both finish at the same time, okay, if we're measuring power in terms of fitness, the 5'2" woman is the loser because she moved the weight less distance,
right,
and she had more time to do it. And that's the key component here. So when this guy, Russ Green or whatever, makes a comment like it's human performance racing, well, no shit, but that's exactly what the CrossFit Games is. That's exactly what the Open is. It's human performance racing. We're not measuring your height and determining how far you're moving the weight. We're not computing your power. So, I mean, Russ Green just should go back to the drawing board and look at his own equation there. So, yeah, so my point is just simply that, I think there's a little bit of jealousy coming in there. It seems more so than, having an issue with the way that the sport is actually structured. It just comes down to, I think, someone's actually being successful using CrossFit-like concepts, and these really are. You have to give credit to CrossFit. But also, to be fair, Tony Buddy, the guy who, brought this league to life, did work for CrossFit, and from what I understand, he took this idea to CrossFit and was shot down. So
yeah, I was just going to say
so
that.
if you have a guy in your organization giving you good ideas, it's probably a good idea to listen to him.
I mean, I can't. You're always going to have CrossFit it's all competitive, right? So yeah, they don't want the competition. I mean, it's no different from Burger King bashing on McDonald's, and they're always going to try to fight back and forth. So I think it's just to be expected, and it is what it is.
Burger King, man, by far.
Oh yeah.
Well, good for the consumer, but not good for the I guess the business CrossFit. Yeah. But they're making so much money. I mean,
well, that's the thing. They don't want to make less money because now there's other events that there's going to be less attendance to the CrossFit Games.
I mean, this also sort of touches on the business model, right? So when you have a business model where you trademark your name and you're the only one allowed to use your name and you're successful, the flip side of that is that sort of has the opposite effect of now that you're pervasive in the marketplace, no one needs your name to underscore what it is that they're doing.
But the thing here, though, is I think this is actually sort of helping CrossFit a little bit because their brand is so well known that, regardless of what this new league is called, people are going to see it as CrossFit, and they're going to keep thinking, oh, CrossFit, and that's benefiting CrossFit as a brand. So
totally, but down the road, I think you'll see more de-affiliations with CrossFit because they won't need the name for marketing at that point. Mm-hmm. So that's really my point from the business aspect, and I think you'll see more and more of that. We've seen some of that here in town. Actually, some of the more well-known gyms have dropped their affiliation and just gone with whatever their trade name is. Mm-hmm. I think you'll see more and more of that.
Well, I mean, I think that's a problem that CrossFit needs to deal with. Is if all they're doing is licensing their name and nothing else, then they need to maybe switch their business model if that's what they're concerned about.
They need to charge $1,000 to train people, right?
I think all they look at right now is the net result, and that's growing exponentially every year. Totally. So I think they are thinking if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's good to get competition in the marketplace. For
Absolutely.
them.
Totally.
Especially good for the athletes, good for the consumers, and
it's
spectators.
Concept,
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like you said, he's just arguing because he's affiliated with CrossFit and he wants to make it known that CrossFit has nothing to do with this. But it is interesting that he used to work for CrossFit.
Yeah.
Came up with the idea, proposed it to him, got shut down, and then something to mention is that CrossFit just announced recently that they're going to be doing a worldwide team competition at the end of August. And essentially it's 2 guys and 2 girls, and you can create your own team. You can do superstar teams, but they're trying to market it to everybody. It's like $100 if you train the same affiliate, or $500 if it's a superstar team. And so obviously they see some ability to maybe get some of the market share with the team aspect.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the real question is, does this thing have legs? And I think CrossFit has proven that CrossFit, as it's packaged, has legs. But will this? And so, what are some of the aspects that go into creating a professional sports league that actually has legs? Or will this thing go the way of the USFL? And we'll have Herschel Walker playing in Canada. I mean, what's going to happen? What's it going to take?
It's going to take a lot of money. I think it already has. There's a lot of money involved in it. It's actually gotten further than I thought it was going to. I mean, when it first came out, but then you kind of you do the research, and you're like, wow, there's 8 teams. There in the beginning it was like 2 teams, and then it kept growing. And then the combine concept was pretty cool. So I like how they did. I like how they set it all up so far, regardless of the racing and coming down to like just milliseconds, I guess, and range of motion from my perspective. But I think it could get big. And the interesting part about CrossFit is that they market it towards everybody. Everybody can do CrossFit. But then at the same time, it's a fitness methodology, but at the same time, it's a sport, right? Whereas this is sport. This is just racing. This is human performance racing. We're not saying it's for everybody. This is just high-end athletes.
Right.
So it really is, truly is going to be a spectator sport. And, they're not saying, oh, you can train NPFL or you can train, I guess fitness or whatever, National and Pro Fitness League, whereas everyone just says, yeah, I CrossFit.
Yeah.
So what would be interesting is to see if, over the years this starts spawning, minor league divisions and things like that, where it's actually an aspiration. And you have that today with CrossFit, where you have 16-year-olds and they know that in 4 years they want to go to the games. But now that you have this other avenue of actually having a professional sports league, to see what sort of stepping stones come up to lead into that actual, pro league.
Yeah, you actually just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to bring that up. One of the things that is common to really popular activities is there's always a farm team. Mm-hmm. And the farm team has a farm team, and the farm team has a farm team. So I'll use my example. I grew up in Georgia. I grew up in the South where football is king, and it's not uncommon to see 3- and 4-year-old children wearing a football jersey or a cheerleader's outfit.
Right.
And then we take them, to the college games and the high school games. And next thing you know, they're playing 8th grade ball and then high school ball, And so each consecutive level of play has its own farm team. Mm-hmm. And I think CrossFit's getting to the point where that's happening here, like what you're saying, where you have teenagers entering into the sport. And the other piece is that Scott touched on earlier is, all popular sports leagues have common terminology. Like CrossFit, for example, if someone says, hey, what's your Fran time? If you're in CrossFit, you know what that means, right? So what's your Grace time? You know what that means, right? And Scott brought up earlier, they're using the term grid. So the first term NPFL is introduced is the grid. So we're going to play this game on the grid, right? And we're going to have these workouts, and you're going to have, 11 chances to run through this grid, and it's going to be set up differently each time. And even though that's different from CrossFit, the people who are training for CrossFit specific activities are still doing thrusters. They're still doing clean and jerks. They're still doing snatch and pull-ups and all the other, ways and exercises we use to measure human performance. So from that aspect, when you go to a CrossFit Games event or a CrossFit game or CrossFit event specifically, I think one of the reasons that people can really appreciate what goes into a competition is when you get back to your gym, you've done all that shit. You know how it feels to have Fran lung. I mean, you know how difficult it is to do 30 snatches in a row, right? You've probably worked with an Oli coach at this point, right? And so you have that visceral connection to what's happening on the field, or in this case, on the grid.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, it goes back to having to be creative with these workouts so that, people can relate. Just like you just mentioned with CrossFit, with the standardized workouts. How standardized will the competition, the racing get, is what I want to know. Because I watched some of the workouts and I saw some cool stuff, some cool races. I was like, man, that's a really cool workout. It's a good concept. But then I saw some totally ridiculous stuff. I mean, handstand push-ups with a wall ball squeezed between your legs. I mean, it's like they're taking some of the stuff from CrossFit, and then they're doing it in human performance racing. I mean, my opinion is I'd almost like to see the standardized 11 workouts, and just what to expect and who's going to be the best at those workouts. And then it might take some serious strategy of when to put your players in, when to sub, who you're going to use on that workout. Maybe you can only use them on a certain amount of workouts. Let's say you got 11 workouts and you got Danny Nichols, for example. He's going to be weak in certain areas, he's going to be great in other areas. You can only use them on those 11 workouts. Let's say you can use them for 5 out of 11. Well, you got to pick which ones you want to use against the team that you're going to go against. And you don't know which players they're going to use. I mean, create some dynamic strategy in these workouts. I think the only way you can do that is if you do standardize the programming. And then people can, like you said, compare Grace time, Fran time. Well, come up with some race names. And you have 11 of them, and this is what the first one is, second, third, and so on. Instead of just, it's almost like just recycled CrossFit workouts, and we're going to change it because we're going to make the pull-ups. You see they're doing pull-ups with the wall ball squeezed between their legs, and the wall ball falls out. I mean, it's just, come on, sometimes it's just getting a little silly. But they did throw in some cool stuff. I mean, they did a farmer's carry, for example, which I thought was pretty cool. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to follow to see how they when it grows. It's inaugural season, so you look at any other sport that started. The first year was probably just a total crapshoot, and then it got more viewership and it grew, and then it kept modifying it. And you look at the big sports today. I mean, there's all kinds of rules in these sports that didn't exist when it first came out.
Sure.
So,
well, instead of, I agree with you. I don't want to see somebody doing pull-ups with a freaking ball between their legs, I mean, if you're going to do something like that, let's just dig a hole in the ground and let's fill it with pugil sticks. And if you fall off the bar, you die.
Yeah.
At least that would be entertaining.
You lose, you die.
Old
It's good
school
incentive to do pull-ups.
Yeah, exactly, right? Don't let go of the bar, for sure. So, I guess from my perspective, I think at this point in the game, I think it does have, at least it's on its knees at this point. It may not be standing, but it's definitely on its knees. There's a lot of interest. We've got some money backing it. And, from what I saw, it was pretty interesting. Obviously, like Scott was saying, it has its problems like anything. But, when you see these guys, popping off, 275 shoulder to overhead, that's just pretty impressive. I think it was for 40 reps at one point.
Yeah, it was like a three-man team. I think two guys would hold the bar, one guy would do the shoulder to overhead, and you could sub in, sub out. I think total of 5 guys on your team. It was 265 shoulder to overhead.
265, yeah.
And for I think it was 40 reps, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, these guys were just killing it. 265. I mean, they're getting reps at a time. So, I mean, definitely nothing to sneeze at. But like I said, that was a workout right there where you're watching both teams and they're literally both just crushing the weights.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of like Kirk said, it does come down to like just a, small margin of victory or error, and you're going to lose the match. But it will be. I think it is on its knees, and I think it has potential. I would personally like to see some standardization more than copying almost the concept of CrossFit and being constantly varied.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see standardized workouts, and then I think it would separate itself from, the CrossFit, methodology.
Well, then if they do that too, if they standardize it, you may actually start to see bigger differences in the finishing times, because if the teams know where the events are, they're able to train specifically for them. And you may have some teams that just really pull far ahead because they're training better for that event. The same way as, even in, a sprint, sure, the times for the first 3, podium finishers are really close, but there's always that guy in the back, who just didn't do well. And I think if you start to standardize it and you get these more disciplined training regimens to go towards those races that what they're going to be, then it may make it more entertaining.
Well, for me, I can see it both ways. I see argument both ways. I currently like the way that they don't know how it's going to be structured going in, because I want to see how the athlete and coaches perform with a little bit of anxiety on their mind. You know what I mean? It's just like in here the other week when we did Fran, the guy that's across from me doing Fran looks at me and says, "I'm nervous." Well, he already knew what the workout was, right? But the mystique around that workout was so built up in his mind, right, that he had this anxiety about doing the workout. And I think that's doubled when you don't know what's coming. So I think it's kind of interesting to see these people make these decisions on the fly and see if they can perform, under duress, mentally as well as physically.
Yeah, that's a good point. So,
anyway, I think the thing that's most offensive to me are some of the team names, to be honest with you. Sounds like kind of like the old school roller derby names, DC Brawlers, right? I want to see a bunch of chicks wearing short shorts and roller skates going around in a circle, like knocking each other over. We got the San Francisco Fire, the Philadelphia Founders, which is kind of predictable, Boston Iron, okay, the Los Angeles Rain, the New York Rhinos. Has anybody ever seen a rhino in New York? Phoenix Rise. Makes sense, I guess. And then the Miami Surge, I guess maybe the water surges during a hurricane. I don't know.
Yeah, some of those names, it kind of makes sense, I guess. Phoenix Rise kind of flows.
DC Brawlers, shouldn't that be like DC, I don't know, rollover for a lobbyist or something? I don't know what that should be. DC
I like the
Brawlers.
Boston Iron. That's a cool name.
Yeah, it's easy to say, right?
I like that they're coming up with names and brands and logos and that kind of stuff, probably trying to create some kind of, like I said, viewership and following, and they have matches coming up and, support your team. And
so. They're from my region, so I got to get out there and support the Los Angeles Rain.
Yeah.
They're going to rain. Yeah, I don't know what those mascots are going to look like. What are you going to have? You're going to have a dude dressed like a a flame, a guy running around in an I-beam claiming he's the Boston Iron. I mean, who knows what's going on with all this stuff? But that's probably the most offensive thing I saw. But yeah, any other comments on that, guys? I mean, I think my personal vote is it's going to make it. I'm going to go out ahead and step out on that limb. Can I get you guys to take a stance?
I'm gonna take a gamble. I'm gonna say it's gonna flush out in a couple years.
Oh,
I'll give it. I'm gonna say the over under is 3.
3?
Yeah, I'm gonna
for
say
2 years.
I'm gonna say I think it'll collapse after 2 years. I think 3, and by the 3rd season it'll shut down. That's my guess.
Oh, that's
Or
good.
it'll get bought out by CrossFit.
You can't have an or.
Well, that's how it'll get shut down. CrossFit's gonna buy it out. That's my guess is you're not going to hear about the NPFL after 2 years.
But do you think Tony Budding would sell it to CrossFit after they laughed at him?
Maybe shove it back in their face.
Yeah, money
He wouldn't
talks.
have had to pay this much money for it. It's just my idea.
Yeah, he'll laugh his way all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
I don't know that I
price on everything.
I don't know that I could put a time limit on it, but I think it's going to be really difficult for fans to adopt another sport as seriously as they do other sport. I mean, I can't even imagine people walking around wearing a Phoenix Rise T-shirt. Like, that idea to me just kind of seems crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't really know that it has that great of a chance. That said, I'm happy that they're trying.
Yeah, I'm just basing it on sheer numbers of CrossFitters, 10,000 CrossFit gyms around the world, and it's continuing to grow. CrossFit doubled their business 50% last year alone. So I'm just basing it on sheer numbers who want to compete. And if you're going to say, look, if you come out and show up, we're going to give you $2,500, I think these people have enough of a following and enough family and friends to at least cover the cost of the event.
Sure.
I don't know how long that'll last, but who knows? I could be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. It won't be the last time.
We'll have to see on episode
200
what will that
be? Yeah, exactly, right? Maybe we'll be interviewing Tony while he smokes a cigar and cashes a check or something.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right, so any other comments on that?
Not for me.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I'll just leave you guys with a little tidbit, and I think it was the last episode or the episode before, we had talked about CrossFit suing the NSCA for, some of the fraudulent studies that they had put forth. And the most recent update on that is that NCSA said to CrossFit, why should we know what we publish is true, basically. So there's an article on the Russell's blog if you want to check that out. But basically, if you've been through a lawsuit before, you're guilty until proven innocent if you are the one being sued. So NSCA basically just issued a bunch of denials. So we'll see how that goes. And that's the current state of affairs in the CrossFit world and the fitness industry. My name is Jason Archer. I'm here with Kirk and Scott. We'll sign off and see you the next time.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.